Today on Know the Truth from Philip DeCourcy.
Man is unlike an unthinking animal. No, man was made in God's image. Man was meant to reflect God's character and nature and fellowship with God. But then what did man do? In pride, he rises up against God. And Romans 1:22 tells us that seeking to be wise, he became a fool.
Welcome to Know the Truth with Philip DeCourcy. I'm your host, Wayne Shepherd. Do you remember when you were a kid playing with a bottle of soap bubbles? The bubbles looked so colorful and iridescent as they floated around you. But when you reached out to touch them, they disappeared into thin air. That's Philip's analogy for today's message, titled Chasing Pretty Bubbles. It's from our Current Quest for the Best series, and you can listen online at ktt.org. So let's join Philip now as he opens with a story.
In April 1988, the Evening News reported on a skydiving photographer who had jumped from a plane in order to film a number of skydivers as they descended in formation and then opened their parachutes. Suddenly, the last parachute opened, and the picture on the television went blank and went black. The newscaster announced and reported that the cameraman had fallen to his death. It wasn't until he reached for his rip cord that he realized he had jumped out of the plane without his parachute. Can you imagine that? So caught up in the moment, so caught up in the thrill of pursuing and capturing those skydivers on camera that he neglected the very thing that would save his life. It's shocking. And yet I would suggest to you that if we're not careful, we can repeat this man's mistake, in that we focus on some things that we think are going to bring us happiness, going to give our life meaning, only to discover too late that we have overlooked the things that will save our life. The sad and maddening reality of life is that you can miss life itself. Giving ourselves to those things that in the end do not save us was a problem that consumed King Solomon here in the book of Ecclesiastes. He fears, as this section of the book states, that we can give ourselves lock, stock, and barrel to things that in the end tantamount to a fruitless and deadly chasing of the wind. He's going to outline for us here all the things he enjoyed, all the things he accomplished. And yet, as he looks back on his life, he realizes, you know what? It was all a chasing of the wind. In fact, he introduces this phrase to us. It's a gripping and compelling picture. It's all a grasping of the wind. You read it in verse 14 of chapter 1, verse 17 of chapter 1, verse 11 of chapter 2. Solomon is saying that man's search for the meaning of life and the pursuit of happiness, apart from God, from an earthly perspective alone, without reverence for God, without reference to God, is doomed to disappointment. It will all add up to nothing, a grasping for the wind. You will find in life you missed life. You give yourself to certain things and you overlook the very things that will save your life. And that's a tragedy. That's a travesty. That's what life can be like. We can go after life, and we think it can be found in certain things, and that eludes us. And even if we get those things, we find in getting them, we got nothing. You see, Solomon himself gave himself to those things that in the end proved to be nothing more than a chasing of pretty bubbles. He tells us here, hey, let's get the flow of the text. Okay, we began a few weeks ago with Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 1 to 3. And Solomon argues for the fact that life can be so empty, so absurd, so futile, so weightless and vain. And he says, you know what? That's reinforced from general observation. Just look at the changing of the guard. One generation comes, one generation goes. Life and death in an endless cycle. If you really look at it, life is just one long march to the grave. And then look at the natural order. The sun never fully sets. The sea is never, ever satisfied with the rivers that pour into it. And such is life, this endless, restless cycle. It's so unsatisfying, so unremarkable, so unmemorable. At times, this just seems like a complete waste of time, tears, and toil. He's made an argument for that, hasn't he? He's arguing for the emptiness, absurdity, nonsense, and futility of life under the sun from general observation. And now he's adding another argument. And he's arguing from his own experience. He's moving from the general to the specific. He's moving from the world outside of him to the world inside of him. This section is peppered with first-person pronouns. Did you notice how often the word I appears? I was the preacher and the king in Israel. And then he goes on to tell us what he did and what he accomplished. I made this, I did that, I went there. He's saying, and I can vouch for the fact that at times it seems like you accomplish nothing for all the toil you express and exercise under the sun. He's basically saying this: if anyone could be expected to show a profit for life, you would think it would be me, wouldn't you? Because I was king over Israel. Whatever my eyes desired, I didn't keep from them. I didn't withhold any pleasure from my heart. I made works that were great. I had great wisdom and knowledge. I had it all. I did it all. I had the budget and I had the brains to explore every nook and cranny of life. And I searched out the meaning of life. But I come back empty-handed and empty-hearted. Solomon refused to take the question of life lying down, so he personally plunges into the quest for the best. He didn't create a royal commission that was to report back to him. No, he himself went out to look for the key of life. And he wondered if it was hanging on three doors: intellectualism, hedonism, materialism. And he wondered if knowledge wasn't the key to the meaning of life. He wondered if pleasure wasn't the key to the meaning of life. He wondered if accomplishment and attainment and achievement wasn't the key to life. But he comes back to tell us that he couldn't find life down either of those roads or through any of those doors. He tells us he found it all vanity. Wisdom simply confused him. The more he knew, the less he knew. The more he knew, the less he wanted to know. His knowledge increased his sorrow, he says. Pleasure didn't do it. Can you imagine the lawn parties in Jerusalem during Solomon's time? The music, the mirth, the wine, the women, the wealth. And yet, when he gets to the bottom of his glass wine, he sees a reflection of his sad and sorry face in it. He's as unhappy after the party as before the party. And he looks at all he has accomplished, his gardens and the waterfalls, the universities that have been built in his name. And yet he's standing on nothing that seems like a true foundation. That's what Solomon's here to tell us. The silver bullets turned out to be duds. Knowledge, pleasure, material advancement didn't fill the hole in his soul. Now let's just stop, because those three paths comprise the American dream. You, me, and many of our fellow citizens at one stage or another, if not right now, have bought in or are buying into the idea, you know what? The more I know, the more I have, the more I travel, the more I get, the happier I'll be. The more fulfilled I'll seem. And Solomon has come back to tell us, hey, I was great in wisdom, great in accomplishment, and I didn't keep anything back that would bring pleasure to my heart. And yet none of those things did it for me. I didn't find any salvation in the things I jumped towards. But he did not find life in either knowledge, pleasure, or accomplishment. And you and I will want to hear what he has to say, because these are the things that we chase. These are the pretty bubbles that we believe are going to make the difference in our lives, and we will reach out only to find them burst and become nothing. It'll be a chasing after the wind. You can't shepherd the wind, and you won't find life in these things. But listen to what he tells us. In verses 12 through 18 of chapter 1, he talks about the silver bullet of intellectualism. He puts on the cap and gown of the philosopher. And one would expect this from Solomon. Perhaps wisdom or knowledge is the key to understanding the meaning and mystery of life. And so Solomon begins to muse on the thought that ignorance is our worst enemy. Here's the problem. Why do we feel the way we feel? Why at times doesn't life add up? Because you know what? There's that missing piece, and it'll be found in an acquisition of knowledge. Education will prove to be our redemption. And so Solomon gives himself to the burdensome task and the miserable business of trying to solve life's riddle. Did you notice how he described his search? Verse 13, I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom. This isn't godly wisdom, by the way. This is human reason. Remember, Solomon, at a particular point in his life, is disconnected from God. And he sets out with unaided human reason to look at all that's done under the sun. And he says, it's a burdensome task trying to make sense of life. It's infuriating. And Solomon has said, hey, I'm going to overturn every stone. I'm going to go to the finest of schools. I'm going to send my ships and my sailors out across the world. I'm going to finance research in the best schools. I'm going to put the best brains to work. And we're going to get down deep into life. We're going to look at it from every angle. And I'm sure at some point we'll find that missing piece that will fill the hole in our soul. His mind sought enlightenment. Now, we'll go somewhere with this, but let me pause and notice along with you. This is the first introduction of God's name in the book of Ecclesiastes. Verse 13, I set my heart to seek and search out wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. This burdensome task God has given to the sons of man. The word man there is the Hebrew word Adam, to the sons of Adam, by which they may be exercised. Even though man doesn't know it, the reason he searches is because he was once created in God's image. He wants fellowship with God. Man is unlike an unthinking animal. Okay, monkeys don't spend their day wondering about the meaning and mystery of life. It's all about the next banana or a nut, whatever the case might be. Badgers, rabbits, dogs don't meet in conventions to listen to some really smart rabbit and really smart dog telling them, you know what, here's why we're here. This is what we do. No, man was the crown of God's creation. Man was made in God's image. Man was meant to reflect God's character and nature and fellowship with God. But then what did man do? In pride, he rises up against God. And Romans 1:22 tells us that seeking to be wise, he became a fool. And he didn't retain the knowledge of God. And he suppresses the truth about God. And he goes looking for life where life cannot be found. That's the infuriating thing about life. God is exercising men with this search for the meaning and mystery of life. And it's a miserable business apart from God. It's an infuriating search because since the fall of Adam, the sons of Adam have been seeking to find what they have lost. They know that something's not right. They know that something's not missing, but they're so blinded by their sin and so clouded by their pride, they can't remember where they lost, what they lost. And they suppress the truth about God, and they put God out of the equation, and they go looking for the solutions to life apart from God, which is a miserable business. Because you're chasing your tail. You're trying to grasp the wind. Man has a sense that something is missing, something's not right. I'm sure, like me, you've had the infuriating experience of trying to find something you know you have, but you don't know where you misled it. That happens to me a lot when I'm preparing my sermon. You know, I think about a quote or a story that, that would be perfect for this sermon. And because I didn't write it down or put it into my file, I can't remember what book it's in. And I can spend a half an hour or an hour going through books in my library. Oh, yeah, I think it's that one. And I'll flick through 60 pages, 600 pages, can't find it. And that can go on, and it's so infuriating. You know you have it. You know you read it. You know it's there, but you can't remember where. Life's like that. That's why our neighbors are discontent. That's why life doesn't make sense. Because according to the Bible, man lost the true knowledge of God. Man was made in the image of God. He spends his days trying to find what he has lost. And it's an infuriating business. That's why we need a mediator. We need someone to lead us back to where we got lost. That's the business and ministry of the Lord Jesus Christ. But here's what Solomon's acknowledging. Hey, I'm giving myself to this task, and at times it's burdensome and miserable and infuriating. I want to search out, I want to seek out in life what makes life worthwhile. And that shouldn't surprise us that Solomon would begin here. The first place for Solomon in his search would be the university campus. Some vast library. He wants to interact with the best minds and brains of the day. After all, this was what he was known for, wasn't he? Both at home and abroad, Solomon was known as one of the wisest men of his day. He acknowledges it here, doesn't he? Verse 16, I have attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My mind has understood great wisdom and knowledge. And I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I'm trying to make sense of all of this. And he's got the kind of mind to do it. And he's got the kind of resources to fund the research. Let me just remind you how knowledgeable this man was. If you go back to 1 Kings chapter 4, his renown is spoken of here. Verse 29, and God gave Solomon wisdom and exceeding great understanding, largeness of heart, like the sand of the seashore. Thus Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the men of the east and all the wisdom of Egypt. You go down to verse 34, and men from all nations and all kingdoms heard of his wisdom and came to hear of the wisdom of Solomon. Solomon had the mind and the money, the reason and the resource to undertake this extensive, thoughtful investigation of life. And then he comes back here to report on his research. Okay, Solomon, tell us why we're here. What's it about? Where is it all leading to? Where can life be found? What will add weight to our fleeting days? Solomon says, well, I want to tell you this, guys. You won't find the answer in the library. You won't find it at a conference with some of the best philosophers in the world. It's all so frustrating. The answers don't lie in the field of education. He says, I have ransacked the libraries and I've walked the halls of learning and I'm back empty-handed and empty-headed. The universe has proved to be rather stubborn in giving up its secrets. The test tube and the lecture hall offer no salvation, no redemption, no satisfactory understanding of life. And there stood the wisest man in the world feeling cheated and confused. We would do well to learn that, wouldn't we, as a culture? Listen to your news. Listen to the programs on television. Education is the panacea to all our ills. Whatever social issue they're dealing with, whatever moral dilemma they're dealing with, whatever international problem they're dealing with, it's all about ignorance, okay? Why aren't we in better relationships with the Muslim nations? You know what? Because we're ignorant of each other. And if we knew each other better, we wouldn't be fighting anymore. What's the solution to teenage pregnancy? Sex education. What's the solution to poverty? Get these young people off the street and into night school. What's the solution to those who are chronically depressed? Psychology, psychiatry. Sitting down and learning from a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Solomon would beg to differ. He would tell us as a society and as a culture, while there is value in education, Solomon's not denigrating knowledge to any degree here. He's just saying it's not the silver bullet. At best, knowledge is a critic. It points out the problems, but it is no counselor. It has no solutions. It has no redemptive value. It can't change the heart of man. It can't mold or transform the character of man. And you and I need to remind ourselves of that fact. In fact, Josh McDowell, whose ministry we appreciate, through the 60s and the 70s, often reminded his audiences on the college campuses of America that if education was the key to life, then universities would be the most moral, ethical, spiritual centers in the nation. Is that true of our universities? Go to the frat houses. Go to the libraries. Young people are more depressed than ever. Suicide is rising. More of them are on drugs and pot, trying to forget the pain of life. And yet there they are in the halls of learning, in the places of education. But education isn't our Redeemer. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. We need to give back to the God that gave us life. And in our pride and rebellion, we walked away from Him. That's what we need to remember. And we need to remember that the God above the sun has come to life under the sun in the person of Jesus Christ, who, according to Colossians 2, verses 2 to 3, in Him was all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. You can't make a go of life without first going to the Lord Jesus Christ, who is life.
You're listening to Know the Truth. Replay and share this message at ktt.org. At Know the Truth, we emphasize equipping others with God's truth through solid Bible teaching. And did you know that when you help share KTT, you help share truth? Because this ministry is completely listener-supported, it's the donations of friends like you that make it possible for us to reach listeners all across the world. So, would you give a gift of any amount today? The number to call is 888-644-8811, or give online at ktt.org. As a thank you, we'll send you 12 Stories of Christmas, a book that shares profound lessons all wrapped in captivating stories of people finding joy amid challenges during the Christmas season. Now, speaking of equipping others with God's truth, Philip, our annual Entrust Conference is coming up this Thursday.
Yes, this is going to be our 8th annual Entrust Conference. Can you believe it? Coming up on November the 16th. The event is geared for men in church leadership. And while all our topics throughout the years have been vitally important, I think this one is especially important. It addresses an historic moment and a serious issue in our times. We're going to be talking about the war on man and the need to build biblical masculinity within the church. There's a lot of talk in the media these days about masculinity being toxic, how we as a society need to push back against the patriarchy, and so on. But during this conference, I want to really challenge those ideas and encourage men to embrace godly masculinity informed by a biblical worldview. While society aims to pacify boys and emasculate men and even feminize the church, God intends to build up men in Christ for His kingdom. Men who will lead the charge in the cause for righteousness. So mark your calendar, Thursday, November the 16th, for the Entrust 2023 War on Men Conference. You can attend in person at Kindred Community Church in Anaheim Hills, California, or online via live stream. Hope to see you then.
You can learn more at entrustconference.org. I'm Wayne Shepherd. Come back tomorrow for another message in our Quest for the Best series. That's Wednesday on Know the Truth. Today's program was produced and sponsored by Know the Truth Incorporated. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free."